actually had to live in heaps of dirt at the end of the field roads. They literally had to dig almost like caves and live in them. Of course, this is when the Irish potato famine hits, and these people are starving to death, and you have lots of them come to America. And that's when Patrick came to America too. He used his what family inheritance he had to actually buy a discharge from the British Army in 1848. Then the potato famine hits, and almost 2 million Irishmen leave during the time that happens and come to America. And he had 2 brothers who came ahead of him, and then he arrived in New Orleans on Christmas Day, 1849. He traveled up to Cincinnati. And on the pictures here, this is in Ireland. This is St. Mary's Church where his father's buried. And this is actually the childhood home of Patrick Cleburne. So he wasn't too bad off. It's a nicer home than I live in.
Was that home in Cincinnati there?
Sir?
Where was that at?
That is in Ireland. That's in Ireland. I don't have a picture of anything he did up there. In 1850, he moved to Helena, Arkansas. And I don't know if any of you have been over there to his grave. That's on my bucket list of things to do. I haven't made it there yet. But he moved there. He worked as a prescription clerk at Nash and Grant's drugstore, and he also studied law. And even before he became a citizen, he got very active in the community. He actually became a member of the Masonic Lodge and in the city's Episcopal Church. He was active in both. He became a U.S. citizen in 1855, and he passed the Arkansas bar exam in 1856. He entered into law practice with Thomas Hinman, the man on the left. And the picture on the right is hard to see, but that's the only one I found, a pre-war photograph of Patrick Cleburne. He became involved in the Democratic Party politics in the 1850s. And in 1856, Deputy Rice and some Know-Nothing Party associates ambushed Patrick Cleburne. The Know-Nothing Party was kind of like the modern Democrat Party. If you just look at the history of the politics of things, that they felt that the federal government should be in charge of more things in people's lives. And Patrick Cleburne and Hinman were on the streets of Arkansas walking through there. They were ambushed by some of these guys and severely wounded, but Cleburne was able to kill one of the guys that ambushed him. He was exonerated before a judge of any wrongdoing. And when Lincoln was elected, Cleburne supported his neighbors in secession. He wrote of his Arkansas neighbors, and he said this: "These people have been my friends and have stood for me on all occasions, and I'll stand with them." And even before Arkansas actually seceded, Cleburne joined the Yale Rifles. It was a local militia, and it was named for Arkansas Governor Archibald Yale. He joined up as a private. He's one of those guys, kind of like Forrest, that joins up in lowly ranks and makes his way real quickly to generalship. And when the Civil War began, the Yale Rifles became part of the 1st Arkansas Volunteer Infantry. Cleburne was elected colonel, and he spent the winter of 1861-1862 in Bowling Green training the regiment. And he's promoted to brigadier general in March 4th of 1862, and not long after that he's in Corinth. And you guys probably know more about this picture than I do, but this is a photograph of the Bloody Sixth, which happened just right out here. Cleburne was near those guys. His group at the time suffered 38% casualties, and he actually got tangled up in some underbrush right over here and fell off his horse and wasn't life-threatening or anything, but he got injured during that. Later on that summer, after Shiloh, he's shot in the mouth in Richmond, Kentucky. And that's when he grew his famous goatee. He didn't have facial hair until then, but he had a big scar on his face from that, so he grew the goatee to help cover that up. He lost a few teeth when that bullet passed through his jaw too. During the Battle of Perryville, which happened right after that in October, he was also wounded and had a horse shot out from under him. And on December the 13th, 1862, President Davis promoted Cleburne to Major General, and that made him the highest ranking Irish-born officer in American history. And as 1862 came to an end, he was ordered to launch a surprise attack on the Union Army at Stones River, which is near Murfreesboro. And even though the division that was supposed to support him went off in the wrong direction because of some miscommunication and just the melee of the battle and everything, Cleburne's division pressed the attack and went on. And in 8 hours of fighting, they overran 5 Union defense lines there. His division nearly cut the Union Army in half. Their supply line was severely hampered there. When he got no reinforcements, the Yankees were able to slip away, but he was able to press the battle pretty hard for them. He took part in the Confederate victory at Chickamauga, and he actually was going down the line handing out ammunition to his men. You know, a lot of times you don't think of generals doing that, but he's out there with his men going down the line, handing out ammunition. At Chickamauga, his men pushed the enemy back 1.5 miles, which is pretty impressive. And at the Battle of Missionary Ridge, which was near Chattanooga, Cleburne's division withstood an assault by Sherman, and they held their ground on November the 25th, 1863. And due to the steepness of the terrain, they were not able to fire the cannons. I thought this was pretty interesting there. The terrain was so steep that they couldn't point the cannons down, so they literally rolled rocks and lit cannonballs and rolled them down the hill to run the Yankees off. And Cleburne's division of about 4,000 men held off 15,000 Federals just a few days later at the Battle of Ringgold Gap, which happened on November the 27th, 1863. And the Confederate Congress awarded him an official citation, he and his men, for Ringgold Gap. And there's a monument to him there. It's just south of Chattanooga in Georgia. And on January the 2nd, 1864, during a summit with the leaders of the Army of the Tennessee, Patrick Cleburne made a proposal which actually got some people higher ups angry at him. He proposed that they enlist slaves officially, and in promise for them fighting in the Confederate Army that they emancipate them or free them. And some people listened to that, but some of the higher ups were opposed to it, namely this guy right here that you see, General W.H.T. Walker. Walker had the ear of President Davis, and he used that every chance he got to run Cleburne down after that. Walker eventually persuaded the commander of the Army of the Tennessee, Braxton Bragg, that Cleburne was politically unreliable and he should not get any further promotions. And Davis rejected the proposal, obviously, and let me just read it. 3 times in the summer of '64, he was passed over for corps commander and remained a division commander until his death. And most historians speculate that this is because of his proposal to arm slaves. And he served as the best man at Hardy's wedding. And while he was there, he met a young lady, Susan Tarleton. She was a 24-year-old daughter of an Alabama planter. She was the maid of honor for Hardy's wife. Cleburne met her, and they instantly fell in love. And Cleburne actually proposed marriage to her before he left and went back. And she said, "How about we just write one another?" and they did for a period of time. And they began a long-distance romance, writing letters, and they planned to marry in the summer of '64, but Sherman's advance on Atlanta put a hamper on that, and Cleburne took part in the Atlanta campaign. I skipped over the thing like John Bell Hood here, but in the Atlanta campaign, he was instrumental in slowing the Federal advance, most noteworthy at a place called Pickett's Mill. Cleburne's men, one evening after this battle, serenaded him, and he addressed his men and said this. He said, "If this cause is so dear to my heart that it's doomed to fail, I pray heaven let me fall with it, while my face is toward the enemy, and my arm battling for what I know to be right." And of course, after the fall of Atlanta, he accompanied the Army of Tennessee on the Nashville campaign. And Hood's plan was to capture Nashville. And on November the 24th, 1864, John Bell Hood attacked Union General John Schofield's army at Spring Hill. There were some confusing orders from Cheatham and Hood, and the troops were exhausted after marching all day, and the Union Army slipped away during the night. And in the morning, breakfast at the Rapavilla plantation, Hood brought all of his commanders in and chewed them out, and he blamed, probably as much as anybody, he blamed Cleburne. He blamed all of his commanders. Hood was one of these guys not to take the blame for anything. He was always going to pass the buck to somebody else. And late in the afternoon, Hood's still angry at his generals, and he orders a frontal assault at the entrenched Federal Army at Franklin. And if you know anything about that, that was more disastrous than Pickett's charge at Gettysburg. And it failed with devastating casualties. At 1 o'clock in the afternoon, before the assault, Cleburne met General Forrest, informed him that the Federal position could be taken if they would flank them. And Hood replied, "I don't think the Federals will stand long pressure from the front. The show of force they are making is a feint in order to hold me back from a more vigorous pursuit." Forrest's reply was, "General Hood, if you will give me one strong division of infantry in my cavalry, I agree to flank the Federals from their works within 2 hours' time." And Hood again refused and ordered the frontal assault. And the fighting began at 4 p.m. that afternoon. Of course, this is in late November, so it's almost dark at that time. And Cleburne sat atop a hill known as Winstead Hill. And Hood was angry, and he blamed Cleburne again for allowing the enemy to escape. And he ordered Cleburne and his men to fix bayonets, to take the breastworks at all hazards. And shortly before the attack, General Daniel Govan, he was a fellow soldier from Helena, he leaned over and said this. Oh, I lost my place, I'm sorry. He said, a few of us will not return to Arkansas today. And Cleburne's reply was, "Well, Govan, if we're to die, let us die like men." And Cleburne, in his famous blue division banner with a distinctive moon flying ahead, rode toward the breastworks at the Cotton Gin. The day before, his most famous horse, Red Pepper, had been shot from under him, and he borrowed a horse from someone else. It was shot underneath him. He mounted another horse that was given to him by a young Mississippi soldier. It was shot dead, and then Cleburne advanced on foot, waving his cappy hat, and went straight into the smoky jaws of death. He was shot in the chest and died instantly. And that's a very quick summary of Cleburne's military exploits. His men found his body at the Cotton Gin, and he had been shot once on his left side, and his cappy hat lay across his face. His sword, belt, diary, and boots had all been stolen during the night, but his men carried him to the nearby Carnson plantation, where the wounded had been taken. There's actually 5 generals that lay down on the porch of that plantation. And on on December the 5th, down in Mobile, Cleburne's fiancée, Susan Tarleton, was walking in her garden, and a little newspaper boy, he shouted out, "Big battle near Franklin, General Cleburne was killed," and she fainted on the spot when she heard that. So they never did get to get married. In 1867, she married her brother's college friend, and less than a year later, they were waiting the birth of their first child, and she died unexpectedly. So she didn't live too much longer after that. She died in 1868. After his death, he was temporarily laid to rest at St. John's Episcopal Church. And I don't know if I have a picture of that one on there or not. Let's see. I don't. I'm sorry about that. In 1870, he was reinterred during the Maple Hill Cemetery in his hometown of Helena, Arkansas. And he did receive, so I've had several people ask me about this, once he was back in Arkansas, he did receive a Masonic burial in Arkansas. And Robert E. Lee referred to Cleburne as a meteor shining brightly from a clouded sky. There's 2 counties in Alabama and Arkansas, and a city in Texas, and a park in Tennessee that we know of that's named after him. And upon hearing of Cleburne's death, General William Hardee offered this tribute. He said, "Where this division defended, no odds broke the line. Where it attacked, no numbers resisted the onslaught, save once, and there's the grave of Cleburne." That's something to say about this guy. General Forrest had tremendous respect for him too, and here is actually his grave. His grave is on the right, and the monument at Ringo Gap is the one on the left. There. General Forrest had tremendous respect for him, and he said once at the Battle of Chickamauga, he said, "You see that large body of infantry marching this way in columns of 4? That's General Pat Cleburne's division, and hell will break loose in Georgia in about 5 minutes." That was a pretty important thing for Forrest to say for somebody. You know, he didn't give a lot of praise to some of those other guys. Cleburne said this, and I think this is important right here for all of us today. He said, "Surrender means that the history of this historic struggle will be written by the enemy, that our youth will be trained by Northern school teachers, learn from Northern school books, their version of the war, and taught to regard our gallant dead as traitors and our main veterans as fit subjects for derision." And he could not have been more right. As a school teacher teaching the next generation, it breaks my heart to see what the kids don't know, and also the false stuff they're being told. When I was in Tisch County teaching 8th graders, I had on the average about 65 kids or something like that. And one year we were talking about the upcoming holiday. This was in early January. And they all knew who one guy on the holiday was. But when I mentioned Robert E. Lee, I had 3 students in Mississippi, 20 miles from here. I had 3 students that knew who Robert E. Lee was, out of 60. It's not that they thought he was the bad guy. I had 3 that even knew who he was. That's how effectively they erased history. It's kind of scary. I'm at Corinth now, and the textbook we use is actually on a program out of England, out of Cambridge. And it gives better credence to the Southern point of view than anything I've seen in my years of teaching around here. It's really sad.
What's the name of that book?
It's Cambridge puts it out, and I don't really know the name of it. It's just a textbook on American history. It's 18. The date on it is 1820 to 1941 is the period we cover. And most of the time in schools you start with Columbus and work your way up to the Civil War, and then from the Civil War forward. But the British do it different, and it's from 1820 to 1940. I'd have to look it up, but it's a Cambridge textbook. But it's a lot more fair with some of the things it projects in there than anything I've seen in American textbooks.
Took the part out about getting their butts kicked.
I hate to even do this, but does anybody have any questions about Cleburne? Because I'm sure most of you could probably tell me more than I can tell you.
That little comment there, that's not that story right there tells it all.
Yes, sir.
It tells it all right there.
Yes, sir.
Sad.
Are you familiar what Cleburne did with his men about training them to be more active, more accurate in their firing and all. He taught his men how to fire. Whenever the Confederates organized, they didn't give them no training in firearms or anything. Cleburne did. He helped a firing range, had a firing range, and he taught them, to mark 100 yards or 200 yards where they could aim properly and be a lot more effective
I've
with their
read that. I'm
fire.
not sure what you were asking. Yes, sir, I've read that.
But I thought that was, very interesting right there, compared to the other generals out there.
Well, even with me teaching U.S. history right now, and I teach the Civil War, the only names you hear in there, they cover it just like a jet plane flying over an area. You hear Grant, you hear Lee, and that's about the only names you
Yeah.
hear. I try to throw a few others in there if I can. I'm kind of limited on what I can say, but I put as much as I possibly can in there, I'll tell you that.
That's ridiculous.
It
But
really is.
His men was a lot more effective with their firing than the rest of them were.
Are you still recording?
Pardon?
I was asking.
Said 2 days.